Um dia que se vai na associação, não adianta nada. Que haja convivência, que haja troca. Essa troca tem que ser diária, 24 horas por dia. São diálogos, são trocas. São participações no mundo de surdo. E aí o surdo vai se sentir satisfeito de estar dividindo. Obrigada.
First, I'd like to thank all 4 speakers for excellent presentations and for leaving time for discussion. I'd like to make a few comments, and then if you have questions that you would like to address to a member of the panel, could you please put it on paper and pass it to the front with the name of the person that the question is for. We have another 20 minutes, so we have plenty of time for some discussion. As I listened to the speakers, a number of themes emerged, and I think they're interesting, and then I have one additional comment that I think is worth thinking about. In the comments of each of the people was this observation. When we talk about deaf culture, it's something that deaf people have. It's something that is inside the community of deaf people. It's something that's inside of a deaf person because they live in that community. This is a different thing than the constructions that anthropologists make in trying to describe what deaf people are. Those are useful, but they're not the same thing as what lives in deaf people. So deaf culture has something to do with what deaf people are. And the best source of information on that is deaf people themselves. Ultimately, the most useful studies of what deaf people are will come from deaf people who have lived that life. This is an experience we had with say, the understanding the culture of American Indians in the United States. In the beginning, it was white professors who studied American Indians, and they were able to describe a number of interesting things. But around the middle of this century, American Indians themselves started to describe the culture, and a very different picture emerged. So when we get deaf people involved as anthropologists in the description of their own way of life, that's when we will begin to see things that we have not imagined. And these are things that deaf people and hearing people haven't seen yet. A second thing that emerges from this is that while this thing lives in deaf people, we can see that it very often stands in contrast to the values of the educational system. And virtually each one of the people talked about a culture of schools or a culture of institutions, where the institution has a very different view of what deaf people might become than of what deaf people really are. It's interesting that what deaf people are persists. Deaf culture persists. People remain deaf people no matter how hard educational systems try to change that. Jim Kyle's question is quite relevant. Why is it that we continue to try to change this thing when we know it will persist? Why is it that we think this living thing is bad? And if we look at our educational systems, we will have to see that most policies are designed to eradicate this particular way of life. And let me make one final comment. we can see big changes coming in the deaf world. And they have to do with the fact that people who do not value the way deaf people are, people who do not value deaf people as deaf people, have a tremendous amount of power in our society. In the United States, within about 10 years, 10 to 15 years, a majority of deaf children will have cochlear implants. Cochlear implants. This is a profound fact because society in general views a cochlear implant as a cure for deaf culture. If we can give children cochlear implants, they will stop acting deaf and they will act like hearing people. I don't believe that's true, but we will see. This will have a profound impact on our schools. Not only that, in the United States, the people who are getting cochlear implants are the white children. The black children and the Hispanic children are not getting cochlear implants. So the percentages of those children in our deaf schools is increasing, and I expect to see that happen all over the world because access to cochlear implants will have to do with social class. And the second big thing is that there's a big push in the industrialized nations for medical research on genetics of deafness. And this is viewed as prevention and it's viewed as cure. There's a tremendous effort being put into finding the genes that are responsible for deafness and into what we call genetic engineering, which would allow people to identify the possibility of deafness in their babies and fix that before they're born. So the time may be coming, the medical world views a time in the future when there will be no deaf people. And again, this will be of profound consequence for the things that, for our lives. So we have some questions here. We have 4 questions. The first is for me, and it's in Spanish. I don't know quite how to do this. I will. You read it in Spanish, and I'll listen.
Bueno, no es en español, es en portugués. Así que voy a tratar de traducirla. Bueno.
Pergunta para o Robert Johnson. Eu estou tentando entender a letra agora. É cultura de surdo bater o pé produzindo barulho como uma forma de chamar a atenção de outros surdos? E a mesma pergunta é para o Antônio, para que também responda essa questão. A pergunta é chamar a atenção para o outro surdo bater o pé. Isso é cultura surda?
There are things that deaf people do that hearing people do not do. So of course that's part of deaf culture. But that's not the definition of deaf culture. If we only focus on behaviors like that, then we've missed the essence of what deaf people are. Those are interesting, but they're like, why do Scotsmen wear skirts? You know, it's that kind of question. Those are superficial differences between cultures. The essence of what makes deaf people deaf is what's inside of them, systems of values and beliefs that they have. And because they live together, they get behaviors, they develop behaviors that are different from the other groups. And it makes it, you can identify deaf people in that way. But that's superficial by comparison to what's inside their hearts and their souls and what makes them a deaf person. And the question was also for Antonio.
Eu acredito que é um direito do surdo ter seu comportamento de bater, de abanar, de bater o pé, de chamar a atenção. Porque já foi falado, nós somos visuais. Por exemplo, no tribunal o juiz balança o sininho. E quando o surdo percebe o movimento, isso vai dar uma informação para ele. O ouvinte buzina o carro. O surdo mostra um sinal de que vai apertar a buzina. Isso é próprio do surdo. Por exemplo, se tivesse uma janela, eu tivesse palestrando agora, e um passarinho viesse voar na janela, ele me atrapalharia, porque eu sou visual. Da mesma forma, as luzes chamam a atenção da gente. Isso é próprio, isso é direito da comunidade surda de utilizar sinais visuais. Como o nosso filho nos acorda de madrugada? Tem um dispositivo que vai ser acionado pelo choro do bebê. E aí isso vai nos chamar, da mesma forma que os acenos. Eu não gosto, por exemplo, do ouvinte cutucar a gente. O ouvinte, ele chega a ser até agressivo. O surdo fica nervoso.
Não bate.
Por favor, não me bata, me respeite. Da mesma forma, nós ouvintes não podemos gritar, nós surdos não podemos gritar com os ouvintes. Ok?
Thank you. We have about 15 questions here. This is very good. The next one is for Barbara. It will need to be read also.
Quero saber, entre aspas, bicultura. Como os surdos vivem no mundo de ouvintes? Por exemplo, surdos no meio de ouvintes no trabalho, escolas, entre parênteses, inclusão, família. Isto mostra bicultura?
I think so. Okay. The situations described in the question may be monocultural. For example, if a deaf person is in a situation where their language, their culture, their deaf being is not recognized, then that's a monocultural situation. If they're in a situation in school, perhaps, not frequently, that recognizes the language and culture
of the deaf world as primary, then that could be bicultural. In my research with families, I've found families that had deaf family members and hearing family members, and some of the children spoke English, and the deaf child knew American Sign Language, and the mother and father and older relatives spoke Spanish and Puerto Rican Sign Language, and the deaf boy knew American Sign Language and Puerto Rican Sign Language and was learning to write English. So what do you call that? What do you call that? What was interesting is, in this situation, the sisters knew all the languages. The sisters knew 4 languages: ASL, Puerto Rican Sign Language, Spanish, English, and the deaf child knew 3. So what do you call that? I'd say that's multiculturalism, especially if the family knows deafness, has other deaf people in the family, have resources, language resources, Puerto Rican Sign Language, whatever they use, they understand the need to communicate visually. I hope that answers the question a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. The next question is for Jim.
Oi, Jim. Quando se fala de cultura surda, não é uma referência específica de valores de um povo como um todo. Surdos, ouvintes, pobres, ricos, etc. E sim, há muitas peculiaridades do ser surdo. É isto? Ou não sabemos nada ainda do que seja realmente uma, entre aspas, cultura surda?
What do we know about deaf culture? Is a rather long story. It includes the two aspects to culture. One is the external expression of culture, the arts, the theatre, the storytelling, the history which is oral, which is oral in the sense of it passed on in sign language from one to another. These external features are growing as deaf people have more confidence in their own language and their own experiences. So we can see very clearly a growth, a development of this external culture. But as Antonio says, there is still an internal culture, an identity, an experience which is uniquely deaf. When I go to a different country, people come to me and say, "Are you Scottish?" I say, "Yeah." "How did you know?" I say, "Well, it's the way you talk and the way you look." And deaf people say the same. "You deaf?" "Yeah, I'm deaf." But it's not the question that's important. What it does do is say, you and I share the same experiences. Now we can talk as if we have the same beliefs, the same ideas. In Bristol, just before I left, the first deaf student became a deaf PhD. He finished his doctorate in deaf culture. He studied deaf culture in conjunction with deaf people, and he passed his doctorate. And it's going to be from people like this who have researched, deaf people themselves who research the beliefs, the ideas, that we begin to see these points. The behavior of deaf people, the beliefs of deaf people, the ideas of deaf people. So we're beginning to see this. But it only comes out if we look for it, if we make contact, and if we create the situation where deaf people can express their culture with confidence. And that's only beginning now.
Thank you. The next question was addressed to both of the women, and since it will be our last question, I will assign it to Silvana to answer.
Queria o parecer dos membros da mesa. A música faz ou não faz parte do mundo dos surdos? E como é trabalhado?
Bueno, yo creo que esa no es una pregunta para mí. La música es parte de la cultura de los sordos, es algo que tienen que decidir los sordos y es algo que me parece que está en cada una de las personas. La música tiene que ver con la audición, pero en algunos casos tiene que ver también con otros sentimientos y tiene que ver con movimientos. Es algo que me parece que no me corresponde contestar a mí. Es una pregunta para la comunidad sorda.
Good. Then we will let Antonio try to answer.
A música, ela provoca som. Temos que respeitar os vários graus de surdez. Mas a musicalidade da língua de sinais ainda não chegou no Brasil. Os surdos acompanham o ritmo dos ouvintes. Acompanham o compasso, e isso é muito fácil. Mas quando um cantor está cantando, nós não entendemos, a não ser que o intérprete esteja presente. Depende de cada grau de surdez. É possível que a gente cante, dance, mas isso pode ser muito chato, muito fingido. Isso é muito bom, mas de repente nós não queremos fingir mais. Nas associações é até possível a gente fazer um baile, mas os surdos, a maioria, ficam sentados conversando. Pagamos por um som que não utilizamos. O ouvinte é que usufrui da música. Por exemplo, se vocês desligarem os tradutores, vocês vão ficar nervosos. Nós somos pessoas iguais, mas com canais diferentes, com necessidades diferentes. A entrada de informação é diferente, e esse é o nosso direito.
There are possibly 20 more questions here, but I'm afraid we're out of time. We need to clear the stage and be back here at 10:45 for the next session. Thank you all. We'll see you in 15 minutes. Sorry to stick you with that question. I know it wasn't, but I wanted to give you a chance to raise your hand.
Tem um aviso, por favor, por gentileza, um aviso.